Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is an accomplished marketing executive, business leader with a wealth of experience spanning outdoor, cycling, and the tech industries. He founded his investment firm to make an impact in an industry that makes a difference in people's lives, supporting outdoor-related companies that inspire and outfit people for a lifetime of adventure. He's also the executive director for the Booger Fund, the national nonprofit that helps youth give back to their communities through cycling and charitable work. Please welcome the managing partner of Digsbury Ventures, Steve Westover. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it. Super glad to be here and chat about everything Booger and Digsbury. Yeah.
Well, before we jump into those, I want to know, Steve, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
Boy, it's kind of interesting. One of the funny stories is when I was at my first job interview out of college, I got hired there not because I was actually a terrible interview, as most of us are right out of college, but I can remember the manager hiring me because he saw my outside of work activities. Like he knew I was a bike racer. He knew I did all these extracurricular things. And he knew I had this sort of work ethic and sort of resilience. And I didn't know that was, the abnormal or that was sort of unique. And he hired me because of sort of this sort of like endurance mindset. So, that mindset sort of like helped me throughout my entire career, to the point where like, now as I'm doing all of my Digsbury stuff, that's something I actually look for in my investments and the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, So the endurance mindset has sort of impacted my life throughout, my entire career over the last, 30, 40 years.
I'm so happy that you said that about mindset and actually using the endurance mindset as a criterion for your investments. Can you give us some specific examples of like human characteristics that you've also seen with people that have this mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think endurance and the word resilience are very similar. Like if like I do early stage stuff or some of it's even pre-revenue. And every time I get on a call with a startup, I am in awe of them to actually take this leap to say, hey, I'm going to start and do this thing is huge. So I have respect for anybody that calls me, regardless of whether I invest with them or not, because that mindset or that sort of like dig in, roll up your sleeves, like muddle through the good and the bad. That's what you need to actually like be successful in this world, especially in the startup world, especially I would say even more so in, the outdoor industry, because, I hate to say it, but the outdoor industry is full of tons of enthusiasts. Margins are low. Competition is thick and deep, distribution's difficult. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of hurdles. So you have to have that sort of endurance mindset to say like, I can see where this is going to be in 8, 10, 12 years, because the first 4 or 5 years are going to be tough. They're going to be really tough. So that, I mean, I've met some amazingly smart people, but I will say you've got to have both the smarts and that resilience, that sort of endurance to actually get through good, bad, rough, times to sort of get to that point where you can say you can actually take a deep breath.
So I have to ask you this. So what attracted you to that space? I mean, from an investment perspective, from a financial professional perspective, I'd love to hear the thesis for like this 8 to 11 years sort of time span. It's not the typical sort of investment model that we see out there today.
Yeah, well, and I have to give my brother Mike some credit. First of all, my brother Mike was really impactful in my life. He introduced me to cycling. Once I got the cycling bug, it was like I was on a specific, very like that sort of changed the course of my life. And he made a fairly big exit within fintech. And so the multiplier within sort of fintech is fairly massive. Like if you hit it big, you're going to hit it big. With the outdoor industry, if you get a 2x, 3x, maybe 4x out of some of these investments, you consider yourself successful. I actually had to sort of sit down with my brother and say like, hey, we're going to do this. It's going to be great. But I hate to say it, but you're going to have to lower your expectations a little bit here. We may stumble upon into a Viore, or I shouldn't say stumble. We may invest in a Viore or something like that, but more likely we're going to invest in some great companies here. So part of, and I think we're very fortunate or lucky to be able to invest in companies that we believe in, that are doing some really great things and some really good in the world. And even support some, I would say, investments that don't get as much, the money and the funds that they should. Like, for example, I've got 2 or 3 women's run outdoor brands that, in the investment world in general, they don't get as much investment funds because they're women. I mean, it's just really an unfortunate part of the investment culture. So we're able to invest in some of those and really make a big difference. But I'm not investing in those just because, like we're nice guys. We do actually see a lot of these brands doing really, really well. I've got like Wild Rye, which is a women's outdoor brand. I've got Oiselle, which is a women's running brand. I've got a number of other brands that are doing some really great things within the outdoor industry, both to grow it on the ecological side, a number of different areas.
Well, as a father of 2 daughters who both have the entrepreneurial bug, thank you for not being as biased as the traditional finance environment that we are fighting through. Steve, talk to us a little bit more about the brands you're looking for. Like, we've got a listener to this podcast today who is thinking about starting a business, maybe just started something. Like, give us a sense of what other criteria kind of fits your portfolio.
Yeah. So when I look at the brands that fit within that portfolio, the easiest way I describe it to people is if it fits in an REI, I'll take a look at it. Like we don't do, I would say, ball sports. I'm not looking at soccer shoes or baseball bats, things like that. But if it fits within an REI, I'll take a look at it. And the other criteria that I think is really important that I think, I don't want to say startup founders make, I don't think it's the same mistake, but they have to look at it. They have to look at where can my brand be within, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And it's important to say it's a brand, so the brand is not just one product, not just one hero product, but they're actually building a brand. So that, let's say you've got one great product, you're building a brand so that you can actually move beyond that product. And you can get to $50 million, $100 million, because that's when investors like myself who are gambling on you early on are actually going to see that return. Because, much like other companies, we have overhead, we have expenses, we have, more than just the money that we've actually put into you. So ultimately in 5 or 10 years, when we get that investment back, we're actually making a couple bucks and we're supporting you.
That's super helpful. I'd like to shift gears slightly and talk about you and your background. And you mentioned racing, cycling. Can you give us a sense of a little bit more about who you are?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded, early on, I got the cycling bug from my brother, and that sort of set the course of my life. I got through college. I was always sort of a mediocre student, but when it came to my work ethic or sort of my resilience and just motivation to do things, that was always hot. Worked through bike shops in through college, got out of school, worked for Raleigh Bicycles, which is a fairly significant bike company. I'm old. I'm like 50 some years old now. So this was like 25 years ago. Worked for Raleigh Bicycles, and they were actually doing their own they're doing manufacturing in the U.S. It was a pretty remarkable company at that time, and worked through there. Ended up moving to California, working for Giant Bicycles. Did all the sports marketing there. That was actually a wonderful job with really great people. Learned a lot from that. But I eventually transferred to the tech industry, ended up working for Microsoft for a number of years, which for sort of a younger kid who didn't really pay attention too much in school, Microsoft was an amazing experience for me. It was kind of like getting your MBA while on the job. Worked there for a number of years. And then I really found my passion at startups. So I worked in a couple different companies, both in healthcare, telecom, action sports. And that's really what sort of fit my personality and how I actually worked. And then ultimately went back to the bike industry, worked as the CMO at Excel North America, which was basically a conglomerate of brands, Diamondback, actually Raleigh. So 20 years later, I come back to the same brand, and worked for them for a number of years, and then for a number of years in healthcare. And then ultimately, my brother and I started the fund. So, yeah, interesting career trajectory.
Yeah, for me, my career has always felt like a random road, random walk. But then when I look backwards, it's a perfectly straight line because things just made sense. Yeah. I'm curious. At Microsoft at that time, I mean, that must have felt like a startup in many different ways. What were you working on specifically that kind of opened up these other doors?
At Microsoft specifically?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I would actually say that when I worked for Microsoft, Microsoft at that point, this was probably, this is probably 15 years ago. When I worked for Microsoft was at their sort of what I would call bloated phase. And it was like trying to steer a ship, so, if you wanted to make a pivot, it was like, like very, very slow. But I actually had this really great opportunity when I was there. There was this new thing called online retailing. So I actually managed and built their whole online retail group, or I say digital online retail group, to where we would actually build essentially like merchandising assets to fit within, say, Amazon at the time, or in Germany, it was Media Mart, or, just across the world. And I actually spent a lot of time traveling to Paris and London, Germany, number of different areas, essentially working with these companies to essentially merchandise Windows, Office, Xbox, just a number of these things. And that part of the business was actually really exciting, really sort of like changed some new innovations in how we did that. That was actually really, really exciting time. Unfortunately, I was there when I left. It was 2009, just basically after the collapse. And I think they got rid of like 15% of their workforce. So I was part of that, and they sort of just folded things together.
It's interesting. I fell in love with my passion of entrepreneurship. And my first job out of school was at Fannie Mae, and they had a corporate venture capital group. And we put a bunch of money into mortgage-related technology businesses around the first bubble burst, right? So we were dealing with all the venture capitalists, West Coast venture capitalists with ridiculous valuations. But the reason I bring up the point is if it wasn't for me sitting in that chair in the corporate venture capital group dealing with Series A, Series B companies, I wouldn't have found this passion for helping small businesses and medium-sized businesses. And so it really pivoted my career. And so that's why I asked for a little bit more detail.
Well, but I think what was interesting is when at Microsoft, and I don't want to bash Microsoft. It was an amazing experience for where I was at in life. Where I learned what you learned was actually after that. I went from Microsoft to a small little startup action sports camera company. I was like one of like 8 employees. We ended up growing to, I think, 100 employees in like 2 years. That's where I actually found my passion for entrepreneurship, how fast companies can move, and truly the difference that you can actually make in a business, based on the decisions that you actually make, or just the amount of effort and work that you put into a company. You saw your returns or that effort come to fruition. It was real exciting. That's where I really got my sort of understood that my personality and my passion fit better within those type of environments. And ever since then, I sort of knew what I liked to do and what I was good at.
Yeah, you very quickly get your results. Right?
Yeah, totally.
When you're sitting in Fannie Mae or sitting in Microsoft, you can make some dumb mistakes and kind of get away with it and sort of hide in the walls. But when you're running your own business, like, it's pretty immediate.
Yeah. Well, but you can also, in Microsoft, if you made a mistake, it would be like a year till you could rectify that mistake. So you're sort of wallowing in your guilt of making that mistake. What I learned at the startups is I could screw something up on a Monday, and by Friday I could have it fixed and turn it into a positive. And that was for my sort of low attention span personality. That was absolutely amazing for me.
Very well said. I'm curious, Steve, in the space that you're investing, what new innovations, what do you see around the corner? What do you think is coming up next? I mean, obviously the wearables is a big thing. There's a ton of data. There's AI. Like, there's a lot of tech now in our sport. Curious what you're seeing around the corner.
Boy, that's a tough one. As far as innovation, it's actually kind of crazy. I see a lot. So I'll give you a little bit of a perspective on the outdoor industry. If you haven't watched the industry for the last couple of years, we went through a COVID boom. Like everybody was riding bikes, everybody was out running, everybody was out hiking, everybody was out camping, and the outdoor industry went through a unprecedented boom time. And everybody's like, cool, I've got cash. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Well, unfortunately, it was also, this, what we call a hangover or whiplash. So 2 years later, everybody had already bought their $8,000 road bike and nobody wanted to buy another one. And the bike industry said, hey, we think this boom's going to keep going. So they overproduced. And that story, although the bike industry was hit probably the hardest out of all those categories, that's the same for, camping equipment. I mean, just numerous categories. If you walk into an REI and REI in general, you saw that I think they lost $300 million last year. They were struggling. I mean, at one point, REI had containers and containers of products sitting in their parking lots that they really couldn't sell. So what I see nowadays is we're sort of coming out of sort of that hangover period where people are starting to sort of get their mojo back and innovate. But a lot of that innovation is actually around how they sell products, where they sell products, how can they more efficiently do those products, what's interesting is you see a lot of, like in the running space, you see a lot of smaller brands who are, $10, $20 million. They're now, $500 million companies because they've been able to follow that boom. And in the running space, the boom is actually continued.
Hmm.
And Nike sort of took their eye off the ball. So you're actually seeing almost like innovation within the products, innovation with how stuff is sold. And then you're also seeing a sort of a change in a regard in a lot of these different categories, which is giving smaller companies who are more agile, a little bit faster, opportunity. So it's less about like, I would say, what's the new cool thing, and it's more about almost like, how do you run your business even better in sort of the things that they learned over the last 4 or 5 years? That's actually kind of probably one of the most innovative things. I know it's not like the flashy, exciting tech that we see, but it's probably the thing that makes the biggest financial impact and business impact right now.
That's really insightful. And it's funny that you brought up, COVID and the boom. I've got 2 kayaks that are still sitting in my woodshed that I bought during the COVID time because I thought I was going to become this outdoorsy kayaker. But anyway, Steve, let's jump gears. Let's talk about the Booger Fund. Describe that to us and give us some information around that.
Yeah. So that was something that my son and I started probably I think it's probably been 8 years ago at this point. My son and I were both sort of like, we're both pretty active bike racers. This 8 years ago, so I was like early 40s. My son was like 10 years old. We showed up to a bike race, and we both like were leaving the teams that we were on. And when you fill out, as when you fill out the little form to register, I was like, Finn, what should we put our team name down? I mean, this is like a rare thing. We get to pick our own team name. And I remember back like a couple of years before that, when he was like 4 or 5 years old, he was on this little kicker soccer team. And the coach said, "Hey, what do you want to name to 4 or 5 years old kids? Hey, what do you want to name your team?" And of course, all these little kids were like, "Hey, let's choose Booger." And when the coach actually sent out an email to the rest of the parents, and the coach was like, "Hey, we named a Booger." One of the parents actually said, "Hey, I don't like that name. I don't think it's appropriate for a little kids team." And I can remember, talking to the coach like a week later after he changed the name. And I remember thinking that was so like disappointing, like to not let these kids use this just funny name. So as a joke, I write in, this is like several years later, Booger in the team name, not knowing that I would be at this point with this program. And so for the next year, we just sort of used that name. The next year we made jerseys. And the year after that, a couple other kids wanted to join. And through COVID, racing got shut down. So as Booger, it was like my son and I and maybe like 3 or 4 other people, we started doing charity rides. So we would ride to all the like Dick's drive-ins. It's like this kind of famous eatery and hamburger place in Seattle. It was like 90 miles. We raised $6,000 for a local dog rescue. We did another ride where we would raise $7,000 for a healthcare nurses organization. And so at that point, I formed it as a 501c3, and we really formed the team on philanthropy and bike racing. So when the kids joined the team, and now we're up to probably 200 kids at this point.
Wow.
We're in 5 or 6 different states. We do a fair amount of fundraising throughout the year. And when the kids join the team, they don't pay to be on the team. They actually have to donate $100 of their money to a charity of their choice. We don't dictate what it is. They can be whatever they want. And we give them a pair of shorts and a jersey. They're on the program. So that gets them in that sort of philanthropy, like giving back state of mind, which we really founded what the team is today on that. And it's been remarkable for these kids to come in and, like I don't know if you raced when you were in your teens or whatnot, but back in the day, it was like, what can this team give me? like, oh, they
Right.
gave me a frame, they gave me a pair of wheels. But we sort of flipped that on the other side and said, hey, what can you do in your community? Like we do trail work. We work at, we donate to Northwest Harvest. We go to the food banks. We sort, food. We do all these things pretty much every month so that the kids get in this mindset of sort of giving back while also doing bike racing. And we've got kids who are on the national championship podium. They fly all over the country, going to cyclocross races, mountain bike races. And it's just sort of like, I will happily say that I didn't really plan for Booger, this goofy name, to become this sort of like national organization. And now we're doing, grant writing, we do fundraising, we do a lot of different things. At this point, we've got 4 different camps this spring. We've got one in the fall. We do basically educational stuff throughout the year. I mean, it's, we've got an employee. We have a ton of contract work that we have do to run the organization. It's really developed into something which I think is really special at this point. And we have some great support from the community to really keep this thing running and keep the cost low. One of the things that I learned when my son was doing soccer was they've sort of what I call professionalized amateur sports. So as you know, cycling is really expensive. Well, they've made soccer really expensive. Like if you want your kid to play soccer in Seattle, you've got to spend $6,000 on coaching. You've got to spend, X number on jerseys. You've got to travel to LA and do some, tournament. It's a $20,000 experience for your 12-year-old to go play soccer these days in Seattle. And part of the reason we have Booger is to lower that barrier because a kid's already spending, or say parents are already spending $2,500 on a bike, just to get them out there to race. So we're trying to bring more kids in. I feel like we have. I mean, there were, a couple junior racers out there every weekend. Now we've got like tentfuls of kids racing and having fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are you doing the training as well? Like these kids racing together, training together, or are they just underneath your brand and giving back to the community?
So, we don't actually do what I call, like fitness coaching. So, that's probably the one thing that we don't do. Like we provide skills-based, coaching. We actually have a team nutritionist. We have a number of parents and whatnot that do, almost psychological training with the kids, like, a lot of our, we have a Booger Academy program that teaches them goal setting, leadership, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to like physical coaching, like training peaks type stuff, I basically tell the kids like, hey, you're on your own for that because coaching is such a personal thing that, a one size fits all isn't just not going to work. So that's probably the one thing that we don't provide the kids.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
You mentioned community. How can our community support Booger?
We always take donations. I mean, if you go to teambooger.com, I think /donate, you can always donate to the program. That is extremely helpful because we've grown so much that, for example, we have 23 kids going to the first US Pro Cup in California. And we're trying to make that as, we don't pay for everything for the kids to go there, but we're trying to support the kids with housing. So if the parent gets them there, they're going to be housed. We've got coaches to supervise them. We actually contract out to have professional mechanics in our tents and whatnot. We went from like 6 to 7 kids going to those races. This year, we're now up to like 23. So our expenses have actually gone up much higher. But the other thing that you can do is time, like if you've got expertise or you've got connections to support or sponsorship, that's actually hugely helpful for the program. I always say that sometimes time, or a lot of times time is more valuable than making a donation, and some of that's just coming out and riding with the kids. But some of that's like, hey, if you've got financial or accounting experience, we would love to talk to you, or have you on the board. We have, we're actually, we're adding 3 new board members this year. Just, we have 2-year board agreements. So we're adding a couple new board members this year. So time experience is great to add to this organization, because we're sort of moving into what I call going from a team to truly an organization. Like, for example, this year we're doing grant writing this year. And that's super new to us. We have some great consultants helping us out with that. But if we've got people who have connections to, organizations that give out grants, or they actually have experience with grant writing and no connections, that's huge. So any help or support, reach out directly to me. My email is steve@teambooger.com. Super easy to remember. Fairly unique. Yeah.
And we'll certainly include those links in the show notes. Steve, I gotta ask you this: how do you manage your time? I mean, between looking at investments, managing your portfolio, and being the executive director for Booger Fund, like, there's only 24 hours in a day, my friend.
Yeah, it can be a bit much. I think the one thing I enjoy working. So, and I'm also fortunate that both my kids are now in college. What I do now would not have been possible, let's say 7-8 years ago, because, I needed to spend a lot of time, or wanted to spend a lot of time with my family. But now, luckily I'm fortunate that I can spend a lot of time working, and I can also sort of combine, personal life with work life. But I put in a fair amount of hours, but I can't complain. For example, I've got a trip to Sea Otter for a couple days to check out the bike industry, and have a few meetings. After that, I'm going to a training camp with some of the boogers down in Santa Rosa. It's not like I'm working 12 hours a day in a stuffy office. So, my burnout level is low. And, it takes a lot for me to kind of get to that point. And it's flexible, like I can, take an afternoon off or a morning off because, I have a fairly flexible schedule. Yeah.
So I did the Ironman in Santa Rosa many years ago. Be careful on those roads.
Yeah.
They're full of potholes and bumps and gravel. And
yeah. Well, we moved, and actually it's funny you say that, because we used to do the training camp down in like southern, South San Francisco, like Belmont area. Do you know Belmont, Redwood City? We moved it there to Santa Rosa, because the roads are safer. Because we got to the point where it wasn't just like 4 or 5 of us. We've got 2 camps in California this year. I think one of them's like maybe 10 kids. The other's probably 20 plus kids. And, we just have, I mean, if you're even in the boonies, when you're out in the Redwood City, like that area of San Francisco, people are still doing like 90 miles per hour on the back road. So you just can't risk it. So Santa Rosa is a little bit safer, but still, I don't really relax the entire weekend, until the minute everybody comes home on the last ride. So, it can be a little anxiety inducing, but we also do a lot of mountain biking there. We stay off the roads, quite a bit too. So
that's awesome. All right. I'm going to jump back for one last question to talk about entrepreneurship. We've got an audience member, again, thinking about starting their business. What's a common mistake they're going to bump into that could help them sort of get through the windy road?
I would say, I would say the one piece of advice, a couple pieces of advice, I would say, don't go it alone. I think so when Mike and I started the Digsbury, the fund, I was fairly new to running an investment fund, but I'd done a lot of research, a lot of reading, and I heard how cutthroat it could be. and how difficult it might be to get some deals or within some deals. The outdoor industry is basically the opposite of that. It is the most welcoming and supportive environment that you could ever be in. So if you're an enthusiast and you're like, hey, I got this amazing idea for a brand. We're going to start with a backpack. If you're really hustling, within 3 months, you could have a fantastic network of people who know other people who are looking to invest. They probably have contacts with vendors in, 3 different countries. It's really reaching out and just talking to people. And I think in the outdoor industry, and, like I've said this out loud, and sometimes I've regretted it. I'm more than happy to be contacted because I can usually get you in contact with somebody, or I know somebody that knows that space. And I bet you that person is most likely to talk to you and say, hey, I've got so-and-so, and whatnot. So I would say it's network, reach out, share your idea, share your enthusiasm, and start putting this thing together. And then ultimately you're going to have to, work with somebody who really knows like how to put a deck together, et cetera, because ultimately, yes, you've got to be able to pitch and show an investor like myself how they're actually going to get a return on this. I think one of the issues that the outdoor industry has is it's full of enthusiastic people, and you've got to do a little bit more than be enthusiastic about your product. I always say that I'll hire somebody I'll hire somebody's enthusiasm over skill sometimes. But when it comes to investment stuff, you've got to show, sort of that endurance mindset. You've really got to show that endurance mindset to sort of like, I'm going to make this successful, because it's really, really hard. Like I said, I am impressed and in awe of anybody that's going down that road.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's always that point in time, right, that your hobby or your passion turns into a business.
Yeah.
And you got to sort of follow some rules, and you got to make payroll, and you got to pay your vendors, and you got to raise your prices. And you can tend to get out of your comfort zone of creative and building. And so to your point about not doing this alone, right? Find that opposite personality that enjoys the writing policies and setting pricing rules and dealing with customer problems so that you can stay creative.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And you'll learn pretty good. You'll learn pretty fast what you like to do and what you need help with. Unfortunately, in a lot of startups, you may just have to do that stuff you hate for the first 2 or 3 years. I mean, I even experienced that with Booger. We're a nonprofit, so I can't just go hire 4 different people to do, X, Y, and Z. I'm trying to keep the expenses pretty low, but now we're getting to that point where like, I know that if I spend X amount of time more on fundraising and less on accounting and hire somebody to help me out with that, I can actually bring in more money. So yes, I mean, you're going to have to sort of muddle through those early years of like, doing the stuff that just kind of sucks. Right. But you'll get there. I mean, you'll eventually get there. Yeah.
The bootstrapping.
Yeah.
Steve, it's been great having you on the show. Audience members, please check out Booger Fund. Please check out Digsbury. Take Steve up on his offer to connect with him. If you've got a creative product or an idea in this space. Like the show, please subscribe. Let's share this with our community so we can spread this word as broadly as we can. Again, Steve, it was awesome having you on our show. Thank you for all your shares.
Yeah, definitely. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits